"They won't stop," Mama fainted, cried the little girl to the Mafia boss, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks as she burst into the upscale Philadelphia restaurant. Her small body trembled beneath a worn yellow dress, hair tangled from running through evening rain that had soaked her to the bone. Heads turned sharply throughout Bellini's, the city's most exclusive dining establishment, where Elliot Pierce sat at his usual corner table, cigar smoke curling around his shoulders like ghostly wings. At 27, he commanded respect through calculated ruthlessness, his empire built on broken promises and bloodshed that had earned him control of half the city. The maitre d' rushed forward, attempting to usher the disheveled child away from the restaurant's esteemed patrons. His apologetic murmurs died instantly when Elliot raised one finger, silencing the man with the subtle gesture that had become infamous throughout Philadelphia's underworld as the precursor to life-altering consequences. Elliot studied the girl with storm-gray eyes, noting the bruise blossoming along her jawline, partially hidden by tangled blonde curls. Something stirred within him, a memory from long ago, of another child desperate for help that never came, of doors closed and pleas ignored until it was too late for salvation. "Bring her to me," he ordered, his voice cutting through the hushed whispers that had descended upon the restaurant. The command was delivered without emotion, as though asking for another glass of his preferred bourbon rather than inviting disruption to his carefully orchestrated evening of business and intimidation. The child, no more than 7, approached his table with a determination that contradicted her tears, hands clutching the edge of his pristine tablecloth. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice steadier than expected. "They're hurting her again, and she won't wake up this time, no matter how much I shook her." Elliot's personal security detail shifted uncomfortably, hands hovering near concealed weapons as they awaited instructions. This unexpected disruption posed a potential threat during a crucial business dinner, yet Elliot couldn't dismiss the strange tightening in his chest as he recognized something hauntingly familiar in the child's desperate courage. "Who told you to come to me?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, curious how his reputation had reached someone so young. Philadelphia whispered his name in fear, not as a source of salvation for frightened children with nowhere else to turn in their darkest hour. "The lady at the diner," the girl replied, wiping tears with a small fist that showed scrapes across the knuckles. "She said you make bad people go away and that you own everything in this part of the city, even the police who never help when Mama calls." Elliot glanced at his associate across the table, their business negotiations forgotten in the wake of this unusual interruption. With a slight nod, the meeting was postponed, the associate rising with understanding. Even criminals had codes, and children in distress activated something primal that transcended the usual boundaries of their violent profession. "What's your name?" Elliot asked, reaching for his suit jacket as he signaled his driver with a subtle tap on his watch. The restaurant's other patrons studiously avoided looking their way, afraid of witnessing something they shouldn't, conversations resuming with deliberate focus, as though ignoring the scene might protect them from becoming entangled in it. "Lizzie," the girl responded, small fingers nervously twisting the hem of her dress as she stood her ground before him. "My mama works at Pete's Diner on Westmore Street, and my stepdad, he brought his friends this time, and they wouldn't listen when I begged them to stop." Elliot's jaw tightened imperceptibly at the implication in her words, memories of his own childhood surfacing like jagged glass beneath calm waters. Rising to his full height, he towered over the child, yet she didn't cower. Desperation had made her fearless in the face of a man who made hardened criminals tremble with a single glance. 3 minutes, he said to his men, tone emotionless, as winter frost settling over the city. "Get the cars ready and call Harding. Tell him to meet us there with his medical kit and be prepared for a house call that requires absolute discretion." The rain had intensified outside, reflecting neon lights across puddles that transformed Philadelphia's streets into a kaleidoscope of broken color. Elliot lifted Lizzie into the back of his Bentley, noting how she sank into the leather seats with momentary awe before urgency reclaimed her features, and her eyes fixed on him with a trust so pure it felt like an accusation. The yellow house on Westmore loomed sad and waterlogged under the downpour, with broken shutters that clattered in the wind like teeth chattering from cold. Music thumped from inside, punctuated by bursts of laughter that twisted Elliot's expression into something dangerous and precise, as he calculated exactly how to handle the men who would make a child run through rain for help. "Stay here," he instructed Lizzie, his voice allowing no argument as he straightened his tie with deliberate care. The movement was oddly formal for what was about to unfold, a ritual that separated the businessman from the enforcer who had built his reputation on ensuring lessons were learned permanently. His security team assembled wordlessly, moving with practiced coordination that spoke of scenarios rehearsed and executed countless times before. No weapons were drawn. They wouldn't be needed for the type of men who terrorized women and children, men who had never faced consequences equal to their cruelty until this moment that would redefine their understanding of fear. The front door splintered beneath one well-placed kick, silencing the revelry inside as effectively as a gunshot. 4 men froze in various states of intoxication, beer bottles suspended mid-air, cigarettes burning forgotten between fingers, as their eyes widened with the slow dawning realization that their actions had attracted the attention of someone far beyond their comprehension. Elliot stepped into the cramped living room, expensive Italian shoes incongruous against the stained carpet. His presence filled the small space like smoke, suffocating and inescapable, as his gaze swept over the chaos before settling on the unconscious woman slumped in the corner, her waitress uniform torn at the shoulder, and a thin line of blood tracing from her temple to her jaw. "Who the hell are you?" demanded the largest man, rising unsteadily from a threadbare couch with false bravado fueled by alcohol. His knuckles were raw, confirming what the bruises on Lizzie's mother had already told Elliot about how the evening had progressed before his arrival changed its trajectory permanently. Without answering, Elliot removed his suit jacket with deliberate care, folding it precisely before handing it to one of his men. The gesture carried more menace than any threat, the calm before a storm that had been brewing since he saw tears on a child's face, a promise of calculated retribution that would leave no evidence but ensure the message was received with perfect clarity. "You have exactly 10 seconds to explain why a little girl had to run through rain to find help," Elliot stated, voice conversational, even as his eyes assessed the quickest way to incapacitate each man in the room. His reputation hadn't been built on mercy, but on perfectly executed consequences that ensured problems never resurfaced once he addressed them personally. "Mind your own business, rich boy," sneered the stepfather, emboldened by alcohol and ignorance of who exactly stood before him. A fatal miscalculation that reflected in the quick flash of Elliot's rare, cold smile that never reached his eyes but promised retribution with mathematical precision. What followed wasn't visible from the Bentley where Lizzie waited, protected from witnessing violence by rain-streaked windows and a driver who turned up classical music to drown out any sounds. Some lessons children shouldn't learn too young, though Elliot had learned them at an age even younger than Lizzie's, shaping him into the man who now ensured others understood the cost of cruelty. Inside, Elliot moved with surgical precision, each strike calculated to maximize pain while minimizing lasting damage, not from compassion, but to ensure the message lingered in aches that would recall this night with perfect clarity. His men secured the others, efficiency born from years in Philadelphia's shadows, where disputes were settled without police reports or courtroom testimony. When Elliot emerged from the house minutes later, his knuckles bore faint marks, but his clothing remained immaculate apart from droplets of rain. Behind him, 2 of his men carried Lizzie's unconscious mother wrapped carefully in a blanket toward a second vehicle, her face pale beneath bruises that had already begun to darken against her skin. "Your mother needs medical attention," Elliot explained to Lizzie, his tone gentler than anything his associates had heard from him before. "She's going to sleep at my house tonight where it's safe, and Dr. Harding will make sure she's properly cared for until she wakes up." Lizzie's small hand slipped into his as they walked toward the car, a gesture so unexpected that Elliot momentarily stiffened before allowing the unfamiliar contact. "Did you make the bad men go away?" she whispered, looking up at him with trust he hadn't earned, but somehow couldn't bring himself to reject. "Yes," he answered simply, helping her into the back seat once more. "They won't bother you or your mother again." The promise carried weight beyond what Elliot initially intended, a commitment forming without his conscious permission, as rain washed Philadelphia's streets clean and obscured what had transpired in the yellow house from which they were now driving away. Elliot's estate sprawled across Philadelphia's outskirts, a monument to power built with blood money and strategic alliances. Security cameras tracked their arrival, gates opening silently to admit the small convoy of black vehicles, cutting through darkness like shadows, given purpose and direction by the man whose orders they followed without question or hesitation. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors, illuminating artwork worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Yet Lizzie's attention fixed solely on her mother, being carried toward a guest suite by Elliot's personal physician, who had arrived minutes before them, medical bag already prepared for the night's unexpected patients. "Will she wake up soon?" Lizzie asked, perched uncomfortably on the edge of a sofa that probably cost more than the entire contents of her home. Her small feet dangled above the floor, sneakers worn through at the toes revealing socks with cartoon characters that reminded Elliot how young she truly was, despite the adult concerns weighing on her narrow shoulders. Elliot poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching light as he contemplated this unexpected complication in his carefully structured life. Children and wounded women weren't part of his world of negotiations and territory disputes, yet here they were, disrupting the clockwork precision with which he typically orchestrated every aspect of his existence. "Your mother needs rest," he explained, surprising himself by sitting beside the child rather than maintaining distance. "Dr. Harding says she's exhausted and has some bruises, but nothing is broken this time, which means she'll feel much better after she's had time to recover away from those who caused her pain." Lizzie nodded with the solemn understanding of a child who had witnessed too much. "She works all the time," she whispered, fingers tracing patterns on the leather sofa, as though mapping constellations only she could see. 2 jobs since Patrick lost his again, but he still takes her money for drinking with his friends. The mention of the stepfather's name darkened Elliot's expression momentarily before he masked it, unwilling to frighten the child with the depth of his anger. "Are you hungry?" he asked instead, realizing the girl had likely missed dinner in the chaos of the evening's events and focusing on immediate needs that could be addressed, without revealing how deeply her situation had affected him. Mrs. Winters, Elliot's housekeeper, appeared as if summoned by the thought, carrying a tray with milk and sandwiches cut into triangles without crusts. Her normally stern expression softened at the sight of the child, maternal instincts overriding professional detachment as she set the tray on a side table within Lizzie's reach without waiting for Elliot's instruction. "Thank you," Lizzie whispered, the simple politeness revealing more about her upbringing than any elaborate explanation could. Despite circumstances, someone had taught her manners. Her mother, Elliot presumed, who somehow maintained dignity and values despite the hardships that had become evident in just one evening of glimpsing their lives. Elliot watched silently as Lizzie ate, discomfort settling in his chest at the vulnerability displayed so openly before him. In his world, weaknesses were hidden, exploitable things to be guarded with vicious intensity, yet this child offered trust with the same ease that most people drew breath, unaware of how rare such gestures had become in his experience. "My men will collect your things tomorrow," he stated, decisions forming rapidly in his mind as he assessed the situation with the same strategic precision he applied to business acquisitions. "You and your mother will stay here until we determine a more permanent arrangement that ensures your safety from those who have forgotten the consequences of their actions." Lizzie paused mid-bite, studying him with surprising perception for one so young. "Are you a superhero?" she asked with childhood logic that pierced through layers of criminality and moral compromise, reaching for the simplest explanation for his intervention in their tragedy. A surprised laugh escaped Elliot, the sound foreign even to his own ears. "No, Lizzie," he answered honestly, something in those innocent eyes demanding truth, despite his practiced ability to manipulate it. "I'm not anyone's hero, but sometimes paths cross at exactly the right moment for reasons we don't immediately understand." Mrs. Winters returned to escort Lizzie to a bedroom adjacent to her mother's, leaving Elliot alone with thoughts he couldn't quiet and plans altering by the minute. Philadelphia's most feared man found himself unsettled by a child's simple trust, by the ease with which she had accepted his help without questioning his motives or character. Outside his office window, the city lights sprawled like fallen stars, each representing territories and businesses under his control. Yet tonight, for reasons he couldn't articulate, that empire felt suddenly hollow beneath the weight of a little girl's hand in his, and the realization that power meant nothing if it couldn't occasionally be used to protect those who had none at all. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains as Audrey Wilson blinked into consciousness, momentarily disoriented by silk sheets and the absence of fear that had become her constant companion. Her body ached with familiar pain, but the setting, elegant and secure, was entirely foreign. Dr. Harding appeared at her bedside with quiet efficiency, his medical bag perched on an antique nightstand. "Your daughter is having breakfast in the garden," he informed her, checking her pupils with a small light. "She's quite remarkable. Hasn't stopped talking about how you were saved by the man who owns Philadelphia." Memories flooded back, Patrick's rage escalating when she refused to hand over her tips, his friends joining the torment, then blackness followed by waking in this sanctuary. Panic seized her chest as she struggled to sit upright, maternal instinct overriding injury. "Lizzie is safe," came a deep voice from the doorway, where Elliot stood observing with unreadable eyes. He remained at a careful distance, recognizing the fear that flashed across her face, the instinctive reaction of a woman too accustomed to men who caused pain rather than prevented it. Audrey pulled the blanket higher, acutely aware of her vulnerability, before this stranger whose reputation preceded him. "Why did you help us?" she asked, her voice hoarse but direct, eyes assessing the man her daughter had somehow known to seek out in their darkest hour. Elliot entered the room with measured steps, maintaining space that telegraphed respect for her boundaries. "Your daughter interrupted my dinner with remarkable courage," he replied, his expression softening fractionally. "Some situations demand intervention, regardless of business interests." Audrey studied him with waitress-honed perception that had categorized countless men's intentions across years of serving tables. "We can't pay you back," she stated bluntly, dignity intact despite circumstances. "Whatever you want in return isn't something I can give." A shadow crossed Elliot's face, not anger, but something more complex that vanished before she could identify it. "I don't want payment," he answered, voice controlled as he straightened a cufflink with deliberate focus. "Consider it a correction of an imbalance in my city." "Mom!" Lizzie's exclamation broke the tension as she burst through the doorway, face bright with excitement rather than fear. She climbed carefully onto the bed, mindful of her mother's injuries in a way no child should need to be, her small hands gentle against bruised skin. Mrs. Winters appeared with a breakfast tray, her efficient movements betraying no judgment of the situation that had brought strangers into her employer's closely guarded domain. "You need to regain your strength," she noted practically, arranging the meal with maternal authority that brooked no argument. Elliot watched the reunion from the doorway, something unfamiliar stirring beneath his calculated exterior. Witnessing Audrey's gentle strength despite her circumstances triggered memories of another woman who had protected her child, until it became impossible. His own mother, whose sacrifices had ultimately proven insufficient against his father's cruelty. "We'll discuss arrangements when you've recovered," he stated, retreating behind business-like detachment that felt safer than the unexpected emotions threatening his carefully constructed walls. With a slight nod that somehow conveyed both authority and respect, he exited, leaving mother and daughter to their reunion. Lizzie launched into an excited description of the mansion's wonders, the garden with stone fountains, a kitchen larger than their entire apartment, and Mrs. Winters who made pancakes shaped like animals. Her animated chatter created momentary normalcy in circumstances that were anything but ordinary. Audrey listened while assessing their situation with the practical clarity that had helped her survive years of escalating abuse. This powerful stranger had intervened when police never had, offering temporary sanctuary that solved immediate danger, but created new complications. Dependency on a man whose business she understood involved violence rather than mercy. Behind closed doors, Elliot reviewed security footage of Patrick's late-night hospital admission, satisfaction hardening his features as he noted the lesson had been thoroughly delivered. Their paths had crossed previously, though Patrick wouldn't remember. The stepfather had worked briefly for one of Elliot's construction companies, fired for stealing equipment to fund his addictions. 3 days passed in unusual domestic tranquility, the mansion's routine adapting to accommodate its unexpected guests, with an efficiency that reflected Elliot's organizational precision. Audrey regained strength gradually, shadows beneath her eyes lightening as uninterrupted sleep began healing what medicine couldn't touch. Elliot maintained careful distance, directing his staff to ensure every need was met, while he immersed himself in business that had been neglected during this unexpected detour into chivalry. His temporary absence from usual haunts had created ripples of speculation throughout Philadelphia's underworld, vulnerability perceived where none existed. The call came during a rare moment when Elliot had joined Lizzie and Audrey for dinner, the child's persistent questions about his favorite foods, having somehow manifested this unprecedented family tableau. His security chief's expression communicated urgency before words were necessary, drawing Elliot from the table with a brief apology. Patrick made contact with the Donovan crew, his chief reported once they were alone, naming a rival organization that controlled Philadelphia's Eastern District. "He's trading information about your operations for protection, claiming insider knowledge from his time working for your construction front." Elliot processed this development with cold calculation, weighing options with the detachment that had built his empire. "He's desperate and grasping," he concluded, though concern flickered beneath his composed exterior. But even false information from someone claiming connection to me creates complications requiring attention. Windows illuminated by city lights framed Elliot as he considered implications stretching beyond immediate threats. Patrick had inadvertently elevated a simple act of brutality into potential business warfare by involving the Donovans, transforming a domestic abuser into a liability requiring permanent resolution. In the garden below, visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, Audrey walked slowly along stone pathways in the evening air, healing bruises still evident against her pale skin. Elliot watched her measured movements, recognizing the determination that had kept her fighting, despite overwhelming odds, a quality he respected far more than the false bravado of men like Patrick. "Arrange surveillance on the Donovan lieutenants," Elliot instructed, decisions crystallizing with familiar clarity, "and move Audrey and Lizzie to the lake house tomorrow. It's more defensible and removed from potential complications." His security chief hesitated, an unusual break in protocol that captured Elliot's full attention. "Sir, the girl has been telling Mrs. Winters about her mother's job. Apparently, Audrey works at the diner connected to Johnson's operation." The information landed with unexpected impact as connections formed in Elliot's mind. Johnson controlled the very territory the Donovans were attempting to infiltrate, which explained why a waitress at his establishment would know to send a child to Elliot for protection, rather than to Johnson himself. Elliot dismissed his chief with a slight nod, returning to the dining room where Lizzie was explaining the plot of her favorite storybook to Mrs. Winters. Audrey's chair remained empty, her brief garden walk extending as she processed the strange circumstances that had delivered her from one dangerous man's control into another's protection. Later that night, after Lizzie had been tucked into bed with promises of security that adults couldn't guarantee, Elliot found Audrey standing in his library. Her fingers traced leather-bound volumes with reverent appreciation, lost in thought until his entrance broke her contemplation. "You're leaving tomorrow," he stated without preamble, maintaining the direct communication that felt most natural between them. "My lake house is more isolated, safer while certain matters are resolved." Audrey turned, moonlight from tall windows illuminating determination in her stance despite physical fragility. "You're fighting with the Donovans over territory," she responded, surprising him with her knowledge of Philadelphia's criminal landscape. "And somehow we've become entangled in your war." Elliot studied her with newfound interest, reassessing assumptions about the quiet waitress who had survived years of abuse while raising a remarkably resilient daughter. "How do you know about the Donovans?" he asked, curiosity temporarily overriding caution. "I serve coffee to men who think waitresses are furniture," she answered with bitter pragmatism born from experience. "They discuss business freely, assuming invisibility comes with the uniform." Morning light transformed the mansion's cold marble into warm honey as Elliot's security team prepared vehicles for the transfer. Lizzie bounced excitedly at the prospect of seeing a real lake house, her resilience remarkable in circumstances that would shatter most adults. Audrey stood in the foyer with quiet dignity, despite borrowed clothing and uncertain future, a small bag of hastily gathered possessions clutched in one hand. "I need to understand what happens after," she stated when Elliot approached, her voice steady despite the power imbalance between them. "Protection has its price, and I need to know yours." Elliot recognized the question beneath her words, the fear that safety might require compromises she wasn't willing to make. "My only expectation is your continued recovery," he answered, with unusual transparency. "The rest we can discuss when current complications are resolved." The convoy departed with military precision, two identical black SUVs with tinted windows taking separate routes to confuse potential surveillance. Elliot rode with Audrey and Lizzie, the child's chatter filling uncomfortable silences as they left Philadelphia behind for wooded countryside. "Mr. Pierce," his driver interrupted through the intercom, using formal address that signaled potential trouble. "We have a tail. Blue sedan, 2 occupants, maintaining distance but definitely following." Elliot's demeanor shifted instantly from reserved businessman to predator, hand moving instinctively toward the concealed weapon beneath his jacket before remembering Lizzie's presence. "Maintain course," he instructed calmly, turning to Audrey with unexpected gentleness. "Keep Lizzie occupied for a moment." Audrey nodded with immediate understanding, drawing her daughter into conversation about animals they might see at the lake, her voice steady despite the fear Elliot glimpsed in her eyes. The intuitive partnership in that moment, her protection of Lizzie's innocence while he addressed threats, created an unexpected connection between them. Elliot made a brief call, voice too low for passengers to hear details, though the authority in his tone required no translation. Moments later, a black motorcycle appeared behind the trailing vehicle, its rider anonymous behind tinted visor as it kept pace with surgical precision. "Contingency initiated," Elliot remarked to his driver through the intercom, settling back into his seat with the confidence of a man accustomed to obstacles being removed from his path. When Audrey met his gaze questioningly, he offered a reassuring nod that somehow conveyed more comfort than any words might have. The lake house emerged from dense forest like an architectural dream, modern glass and stone reflecting water and sky, its isolation providing both security and breathtaking views. Lizzie gasped in delight as the vehicle wound up the private drive, her excitement momentarily eclipsing the circumstances that had brought them here. Elliot's phone vibrated with confirmation that the tale had been discouraged, without incident requiring cleanup, his people understanding the delicate balance between effective deterrence and complications that might attract unwanted attention. The Donovans had tested boundaries with predictable caution, a chess opening rather than declaration of war. Inside, the house revealed unexpected warmth despite its modern design, comfortable furnishings rather than showpieces, bookshelves filled with actual reading material rather than decorative volumes, a kitchen that showed signs of occasional use. This retreat revealed aspects of Elliot that his city persona kept carefully concealed. "This was my grandmother's property," he explained when he caught Audrey studying a photograph of a silver-haired woman on a dock, her smile reflecting the same intensity Elliot possessed without his hardened edges. "The only place I visited as a child where certain rules didn't apply." Something shifted between them in that moment of unexpected revelation, the first personal detail Elliot had volunteered beyond necessary information. Audrey's expression softened fractionally as one piece of the complex puzzle that was her reluctant protector fell into place. Elliot's security chief arrived hours later, bringing news that altered calculations yet again. "Johnson's operation was hit last night," he reported during a private briefing on the dock, waves lapping gently against wood as sunset painted the sky in violent orange. "Professional job, targeted only his books and digital records rather than product or cash." Understanding dawned immediately in Elliot's mind as connections crystallized. "They're looking for something specific," he concluded, memories of Audrey's workplace taking new significance. Or someone, a witness perhaps, or unwitting carrier of information Johnson once contained. That evening, after Lizzie had been tucked into bed in a room with windows overlooking the moonlit lake, Elliot found Audrey on the deck, starlight reflected in water that stretched dark and mysterious before them, the city's dangers temporarily distant, yet increasingly connected to the woman beside him. "You're more than a waitress," Elliot stated rather than asked, maintaining honesty that had become their unspoken protocol. "Johnson doesn't employ random staff at establishments connected to his operations." Audrey's silence confirmed his suspicion before her words did. "I keep records," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible above gentle waves against the shore. "Customers, conversations, patterns, information that might prove useful someday as insurance against men who believe themselves untouchable." The lake house transformed from sanctuary to command center as Elliot mobilized resources with calculated precision. Maps of Philadelphia spread across glass tables, surveillance photographs arranged in meticulous order, and encrypted communications established with trusted lieutenants. Audrey's revelation about her role as Johnson's unofficial intelligence gatherer changed the equation dramatically. Her memory for details proved remarkable. Conversations overheard, patterns of meetings, names mentioned in unguarded moments. 3 weeks ago, 2 men from the Donovan organization met with a city councilman at my section, Audrey explained, finger-tracing routes on a map of Philadelphia's districts. They mentioned a waterfront property deal requiring cleanup of existing arrangements before processing could continue. Elliot processed this information with narrowed eyes, connections forming between seemingly unrelated events. The waterfront development project had been public knowledge, but Johnson's involvement remained carefully concealed, until now. "They're using legitimate business to launder territory acquisition," Elliot concluded, admiration coloring his tone despite professional rivalry with Johnson. "Clever approach, difficult to counter without exposing one's own operations to scrutiny." "Patrick called my boss yesterday," Audrey revealed during a late-night strategy session, fatigue evident beneath her composed exterior. "He told them I stole financial records before disappearing. They've frozen my final paycheck and threatened police involvement. The manipulation was transparent, yet effective. Patrick creating a paper trail that transformed victim into perpetrator, establishing groundwork for legal pursuit that could force Audrey from hiding. His desperation revealed both fear and cunning. Elliot's phone illuminated with an encrypted message that changed everything. Johnson found dead. Professional hit. No witnesses. The terse update rewrote the board entirely, eliminating a major player while potentially exposing Audrey as the keeper of secrets suddenly worth killing for. "We need to move," Elliot announced, decisions crystallizing with familiar clarity that had built his empire on perfect timing. The lake house location may be compromised, and Johnson's elimination suggests acceleration of whatever timetable the Donovans are following. Audrey absorbed this news with remarkable composure, immediately shifting to practical preparations rather than panic. "Lizzie needs stability," she stated, maternal protection overriding personal safety concerns. "If we keep running, she'll understand something's seriously wrong." Elliot studied her with newfound respect, recognizing the steel beneath gentle exterior that had enabled survival against overwhelming odds. "Then we stop running," he decided, tone shifting from defensive to offensive planning. "We set the terms of engagement rather than responding to theirs." The plan crystallized over hours of strategic discussion, a trap using Elliot's downtown warehouse as stage territory concession, appearing to withdraw from disputed areas while actually concentrating forces. Audrey's knowledge of players and protocols provided crucial details that transformed standard strategy into precision instrument. "I'm coming with you," Audrey stated when preparations neared completion, her expression brooking no argument despite Elliot's immediate objection. "They're looking for me specifically now. My absence would signal deception immediately." Elliot recognized the tactical logic even as protective instincts warred against involving her directly. "At the first sign of escalation, you withdraw," he countered, the concern in his voice revealing emotional investment that transcended strategic partnership. Warehouse lights cast harsh shadows across concrete as Elliot's organization executed their carefully orchestrated deception. Audrey remained by his side, transformed by borrowed designer clothing and subtle makeup into the image of a powerful man's companion rather than a waitress. The Donovan representatives arrived with predictable caution, 2 senior lieutenants flanked by security, their expressions revealing surprise at finding a woman present for negotiations normally conducted exclusively among men. Their momentary confusion provided psychological advantage Elliot immediately exploited. "My associate has relevant insights into the waterfront situation," Elliot explained with deliberate vagueness that forced their visitors to reveal knowledge through questions. "Her analysis of financial viability influences my willingness to restructure territorial arrangements." Patrick's presence among the Donovan entourage was unexpected, his position as driver revealing his insignificance to their organization, despite whatever information he had provided. When his gaze locked with Audrey's across the warehouse floor, the flash of hatred confirmed Elliot's assessment. Negotiations proceeded with the choreographed tension of predators, assessing territorial boundaries, carefully worded proposals concealing true intentions behind business terminology and veiled threats. Audrey contributed strategic comments that demonstrated knowledge without revealing its full extent. "The diner records remain concerning," stated the senior Donovan lieutenant, finally revealing their true interest with feigned casualness that fooled no one. "As gesture of good faith in our new arrangement, perhaps your associate might assist in locating missing documentation." Elliot's response died unspoken as warehouse doors crashed open, tactical officers flooding the space with practiced efficiency. "Police! Everyone down!" echoed against concrete walls as Philadelphia's organized crime unit executed a raid with suspicious timing. Chaos erupted precisely as Elliot had anticipated, the Donovan crew's instinctive resistance providing cover for his own team's coordinated response. With practiced coordination, Elliot guided Audrey toward a predetermined exit route, while confusion masked their movement. "Officer down! Officer down!" The shout changed everything, escalating police response from standard raid to lethal force authorization. Gunfire erupted across the warehouse floor, bullets embedding in concrete as Elliot pulled Audrey behind industrial shelving. "This wasn't part of the plan," Audrey whispered, fear finally breaking through her composed exterior as she processed the deadly crossfire surrounding them. The controlled confrontation had evolved into chaotic violence that threatened all careful strategies. The revelation stung more deeply than physical danger. Trust, violated within his carefully constructed organization, represented failure that Elliot rarely experienced. Vulnerability flashed briefly across his features before discipline reasserted control, emotions subordinated to survival requirements. A familiar figure emerged through smoke and confusion, Patrick navigating toward their position with determined purpose, a service weapon clutched in white-knuckled grip, revealing connections beyond mere informant status. The stepfather's expression reflected vindictive satisfaction. Police consultant, Elliot identified with cold precision, Patrick's position suddenly clear. He's been feeding information to both sides. Playing Donovan against police while pursuing personal vendetta? Clever strategy for a man I clearly underestimated. Audrey's hand found Elliot's in the chaos, fingers interlacing with surprising strength that communicated partnership rather than dependence. The connection transcended physical contact, unspoken understanding passing between them as options narrowed to a single path forward. Blood-stained concrete as dawn broke over Philadelphia, emergency vehicles creating a kaleidoscope of red and blue against warehouse windows. Elliot sat alone in an interrogation room, composed despite handcuffs securing him to a metal table bolted to the floor. Detective Pearson entered with carefully controlled neutrality, case file balanced against coffee cup in practiced juggling act familiar to career investigators. "Interesting night, Mr. Pierce," he observed, tone revealing neither antagonism nor respect as he assessed the notorious figure. "Self-defense is clearly documented by your department's own body cameras." Elliot responded with the calm confidence of a man whose attorneys had already begun dismantling potential charges. Officer Reynolds's decision to accept bribes from Patrick Howard created unfortunate circumstances your department will find difficult to prosecute. Crime scene photographs spread across metal table told the story evidence would eventually confirm. Patrick's attempted execution of Audrey, interrupted by Elliot's intervention, the corrupt officer's death resulting from his own partner's bullet during the chaotic struggle. Ms. Wilson's statement matches surveillance footage, Pearson acknowledged reluctantly. Professionalism overriding desire to build case against a criminal figure long evading justice. Howard's police consultant credentials were falsified, and his history of domestic violence creates sympathetic narrative for any potential jury. Elliot maintained strategic silence, expression revealing nothing as bureaucratic machinery ground toward inevitable conclusion. His organization remained intact, despite the night's chaos. Lieutenants executing contingency protocols with practiced efficiency. 6 hours later, Elliot walked free into afternoon sunlight, charges dismissed with reluctant acknowledgement that evidence supported legitimate self-defense rather than criminal enterprise. His attorney's sleek sedan awaited curbside, a return to normalcy that somehow felt hollow. The mansion seemed emptier than he remembered, silence echoing through rooms recently filled with Lizzie's laughter and Audrey's quiet presence. Elliot moved through familiar spaces with uncharacteristic restlessness, glasses of expensive bourbon abandoned half-empty. Inside, Audrey's elegant script provided coordinates to a small apartment across town, far from both Patrick's former residence and the diner connected to Johnson's operation. The final line carried weight beyond simple invitation. "Lizzie believes every hero deserves dinner after saving the day. 7 p.m. No security detail necessary." Elliot stood before the apartment door at precisely 7:00. Unaccustomed uncertainty reflected in rare hesitation before knocking. The battered walls and worn carpet of the modest building contrasted sharply with his tailored suit, yet somehow felt more inviting than his empty mansion. Lizzie opened the door with delighted enthusiasm, grabbing his hand to pull him inside with childish disregard for adult complexities. "Mom made spaghetti because I told her it was probably your favorite," she announced with absolute certainty. "And I made the garlic bread all by myself without burning it." Audrey appeared from the small kitchen, casual in jeans and simple blouse rather than borrowed finery or waitress uniform. The bruises had faded, her natural beauty emerging as shadows receded from both body and eyes, confidence replacing the wariness that had characterized their early interactions. "We've been discussing future arrangements," she explained, gesturing toward modest dining tables set for 3 with mismatched plates and supermarket flowers in water glass serving as centerpiece. "Lizzie has opinions about appropriate career paths for reformed criminal masterminds." Elliot's laughter surprised them both, genuine amusement replacing carefully controlled responses that had characterized his public persona. "I'm considering legitimate investment opportunities," he admitted, accepting the normality of kitchen conversation with unexpected comfort. Dinner conversation flowed with surprising ease, Lizzie dominating with school stories and detailed explanations of neighborhood discoveries, while adults exchanged glances containing deeper communication. The simple meal in modest surroundings somehow satisfied hunger Elliot hadn't recognized. Thank you all for watching this story. If you're enjoying it, write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is important for me to continue creating content here.